my name's Elizabeth Wagner. I'm a hand weaver and a textile designer. Welcome to my channel, Illumination. Through these series of videos, I'd like to explain to the beginner how to plan and execute a project for weaving on a floor loom from the very beginning to the final finishing. So the first few videos that I made were kind of a description of the equipment and the yarn, and then the last video I also explained how to calculate how much yarn you would need to make your project. I've decided on a lady's scarf for our first project together, and the scarf we calculated will be 9 inches wide and 60 inches long. So we decided that we'll need enough yarn to make the scarf that length after it shrinks and after you remove all the loom waste, which I'll explain a little bit more later when we start to weave. In this video, I would like to explain to you how to measure the warp so that we can take it to the loom and warp the loom and get started with our project. The first thing you need to know is that when you measure a warp, you have to keep all of the yarn in the same order that you measure it in. On our warp, we're going to have one color, but sometimes you'll have more than one color, like stripes, and you have to keep the colors in the exact order that you actually measured them in. So in addition to that, you can't just bring a whole glob of pieces of yarn to the loom and warp the loom, because it would be a big tangled up mess. So the purpose of the warping board is not only to measure the length of each piece of yarn, but it's also to keep the yarn in an order. And so the way that this happens is when you're measuring the yarn, each piece is going to kind of zigzag over the piece before it. So in other words, when I measure my warp, I'm going to have a piece of yarn that comes up, and when the piece of yarn comes back over the same spot, it's going to crisscross in a way that will create what they call a cross. And that cross is going to keep every piece of yarn in the same order that you placed it in when you were measuring it on your warping board or your warping reel. A lot of people have a warping board. It's a big rectangular frame, usually made out of wood, with dowels on it, just like these. I have a warping reel, and the only difference is that the reel spins and the warping board doesn't. So it's basically the same exact method, it's just that instead of moving your arm across a warping board, you're just standing stationary and you don't move as much. You just let the warping reel move when you have one of these warping reels. They also call it a warping mill. So what we're going to do is, we've decided that each piece of yarn needs to be 3 yards long. I'm going to use one scrap piece of yarn, tie it onto the left-hand dowel on my warping reel or warping board. And from there, I'm going to measure it so I know that that guide string is 3 yards long, or however long your warp needs to be. So I'm going to measure 1 yard, 36 inches. This is just kind of how I do the measurement. 2 yards and 3 yards. So that's how long we decided our warp needed to be. Alright, so once you have your guide string measured, we're going to start measuring the warp by running the string, which is tied onto the first dowel on the left-hand side at the top, running it under the next dowel and over the next dowel, and then just start crisscrossing the guide string back and forth on your warping board, or just spin it around on your warping reel until you get to your 3-yard mark. And I've been just holding it so I know where the 3-yard mark was. So I'm gonna, at that point, whatever dowel you are at, you've stopped at, is where you're gonna tie it on. And this is just a guide string. It's going to show you the path that your warp should take to create the correct length warp. So that's actually 3 yards. So now my actual yarn that I'm using for the warp is this nice brown alpaca yarn. And I'm going back to the beginning where I tied on to begin with. And I'm going to tie this one on. I just tie a double knot, and I follow the guide string. So I'm going to go under the next dowel and over the next dowel, and then just crisscross your warping board or turn your warping reel or warping mill around until you get to where the guide string ends, and that's 3 yards. So that's going to be 1 warp end on your loom. Now we're going to need a total of 108 ends. So that's 1, and when you come back, you count that as 2, because that's going to be another 3 yards. When you come back, follow the same path that you did going down. But this time, when you get back to the top 3 dowels, you're going to go under the one that you went over here, and you're going to go over the one that you went under to begin with, and then just wrap it around this first dowel. So now you've got 6 yards. Each pass, whether it goes down or comes back up, is 3 yards long. So that's 2 ends you've measured, 2 warp ends. We'll cut them so that they're all separated later. So now I'm going to count 3, going down here, wrapping around the end one, coming back same way, 4, that's my 4th one. Again, I'm going to go under this dowel and over this dowel, and then you're going to go over this one as well. You can see as you start to do this that these ends are crisscrossing each other, and that's what you want. That's what's going to keep the ends in their proper order. So that's 4. Now under and over, all the way down, back up again, under here and over here. So that's 6. Now we're on 7 going down, 8 coming back, under, over, 9 going down, 10 coming back, and I'm going to keep going, doing the same thing until I get to 108. Now if I run out of yarn, I just tie onto either the top dowel or the bottom dowel, whichever one you can reach, and then tie the next ball of yarn onto that same dowel and start all over like it was one whole piece. So I'll be back when I'm finished measuring everything so you can see me take it off of the warping reel.